Good morning. So many thanks for joining us on the 6th Pimento BD Club of the Year. And for those who haven't been on previous calls, please remain on mute unless you have a question, in which case please use the chat box. We want to make this session as interactive as possible, so please engage and let us have these questions, any questions during the session. I might even actually bring you into the conversation as well, just so you can start to just get involved, but welcome. As you've probably seen, we'll be recording today's panel, which will be available on our YouTube channel, Pimento Agency, and on social later today or this week. So today's session is all about content. We'll be covering all aspects of content, from strategy to content development and deployment. And the aim is always, as always, is to give you tips, advice to help you create the right content approach for your agency. And this week, I'm really pleased and excited to be joined by Adam Benzecrit from inflo.ai and James Skellington from Force24. Adam is the co-founder and head of business development at inflo.ai. He leads the hiring, investment, and ultimately commercial strategy for the business. Adam started inflo.ai back in 2016 after setting up SportsFix, which is a sports news app, which was voted one of Europe's top 10 apps by Meta, which is then Facebook, and Cedars. He has experience of a number of high growth technology companies, including WeSeeThrough, which won the Market Research Society Award for Innovation in Research Methodology, and Invisible Technologies, which has since grown to nearly 400 people worldwide. Just a little bit about inflo.ai. Inflo are making it possible for marketers to scale their content strategy 300% quicker than when they go it alone. Their marketers are saving tens of hours on their content creation process every week and are sleeping soundly at night, knowing that they are the partner. Inflo.ai have built proprietary software that simplifies the content writing process so that any marketing teams can create traffic grabbing posts in a quarter of the time. As we step into a new era of Web 3.0, only Inflow.ai combines a data-driven approach with automation to make the blog writing process easy. Then moving on to James Skellington. He is the head of strategic new business at Force24. And Force24 is around supporting brands to identify how automation can remove manual processes to galvanize the link between sales and marketing and help ultimately drive business growth. He has a wealth of experience at Google, full service agencies, and he's had 4 years at Force24. And this has provided James with an overarching understanding of how online and offline channels work collaboratively for maximizing effect. So James, Adam, it is great to have you both here. And welcome to our club. As always, the process is we're going to have 30 minutes talking about some questions that we were sort of talking and engaging as a panel, and then bring the questions in and we'll start the process bringing you guys in. At the end of this session, I have a few house notices to update around upcoming events. But before that, let's get started. So Adam, James, welcome, and it is great to have you here. So Adam, really starting with you, we have a very broad question, and it's often around why content matters. We're hearing so many different views around the importance of content. And from your perspective, why should agencies be focusing on content?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me. And the only difference between James and I here seems to be my glasses. So just to be clear, I'm Adam, and James is below there, at least on my screen. Well, look, I mean, it's obviously a super broad question. Content can be used in so many ways and is obviously vital. Content is really, it's so pivotal to any kind of go-to-market strategy, is the first thing I'd say. So, you know, it's really hard to go to market in any way without using content as part of your kind of recipe. And now, I don't know, I mean, I'm guessing quite a few of the listeners would have read about at least, you know, the move to Web 3.0, which is happening at the moment. Just to be clear, Web 1.0 is, you know, your BBC, your first websites. Web 2.0 is the growth of kind of user-generated content. So obviously social media, and now Web 3.0 is more kind of a data-driven search engine. What that really means is if I search for something, or if James searched for something, probably whatever it is, we will have a different experience in terms of the results we get. So what that really means is there's a real need right now to produce more content than ever. So that's a big point. But content inbound is obviously scalable. So often do I hear of outbound strategies such as cold calling, such as outreach strategies that simply aren't scalable and very difficult to do week in, week out and hit the KPIs you need as an agency, as a head of biz dev, or even an in-house team. So it's really important to obviously adopt a content strategy in the business. Many things, brand awareness is obviously really important, engaging with stakeholders, engaging with clients, partners, thought leadership, SEO, lead generation, all of that is powered really through content. And as I say, now more than ever, you need to produce more in order to actually appear higher up from an SEO perspective, search engines. So a few reasons there why obviously content is important. I don't know what James thinks of that.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think to put it in a way that my mind works, which is probably a little less sophisticated, is just without content being out there, how are people recognizing you? How are you building trust, showing relevance and expertise? Because you are no different from any other company that they may have heard of or may not have heard of. This is a way of you being able to empathize with your audience and show that you are there to either solve their challenges or provide solutions that they require, without putting on the hard sell, which inevitably people shy away from.
And actually talking about the trust and sort of, this goes on to the next question, which is actually the important, we talked about the importance, but it's about creating the right content strategy as an agency and sort of moving into what is the right process for an agency should adopt and what should they be mindful of when developing your approach, because it's often there's lots of people will just chuck content out there which has no value, no resonance, and it doesn't really do anything to protect your agency and actually devalues the relationship you potentially could have with prospect clients. So it's really about sort of when you go through the process of developing the right content strategy, how do you go about doing it? Adam, what sort of processes should you be doing and adopting, and how do you make sure that you can deliver to that content strategy?
Yeah, great question. The first thing, you've got to avoid any kind of write and pray or scattergun approach. And the first thing to get your strategy right is you've got to think of some key questions. So if you're an agency owner on this call, a bit ahead of growth of an agency on this call, so the first questions I would ask in any kind of content strategy are the following: whether this is for your agency to promote your own agency or it's for a client. So the first questions I'd have in mind are really the following. So obviously, what is the service you're offering? What are the services that you provide to the customer? First question. Sounds really obvious, but it's actually really important. People forget what they're trying to do, what they're trying to promote. So that's the first question. The next question is, how is the product, how is the offering, how is the service actually unique? What is different about your service? So that's the second question. The next question is, who are you selling to? Target audience, making sure it's right for the ICP. Who is your ICP? Define your ICP in a checklist of out of 5. That really helps actually in things like lead scoring as well, when it comes to speaking to loads and loads of different potential prospects, etc. as well. Next thing is competitors. Goes back to the unique point. Who are your competitors? Where are they? What do they do? What do you do differently? So before anything, I would start with those 4 or 5 questions there to be really clear, in terms of what you're offering, who you're offering to. We've all heard that before. The next thing, which is slightly more nuanced, I'd say, is then thinking about your strategy in really as pillars. So start with what I'd call topics or pillars. They're kind of the two means the same thing. So start with, say, no more than 3 kind of key topics or 3 pillars is actually really, really important. So a couple of examples of this would be, if you're an agency, you'd offer marketing services broadly, lead generation services, or campaign strategy services. They would be your 3 topics. Or another example for an accountant, let's say an accountant, business advisory you might offer bookkeeping, you might offer management accountants. What's really important there is you have a set of defined content pillars or topics that match your offering, and you know exactly who you're selling to. But don't go to 5 topics, 10 topics, 15 content pillars. You're not going to put out, unless you have some kind of huge content bandwidth, enough content to actually engage and do it well. So start with a few topics, 3 topics, and actually just focus on one initially and start building out from there. That's really important, because realistically, you're not going to be able to publish more than 4 or 5 articles per week. And if you're doing that across 50 topics, you're never going to be putting out 1,000 articles per month. I think that maths was right. But that's really important. So start small with the strategy. So questions are the first thing, which I mentioned. The second thing is then topics, 3 topics, and then start to build out content for those topics, but start small. So there'd be some really high level bits of advice I'd give around that.
I completely agree. And James, do you have anything to add as well?
Well, I love that answer from Adam. It's brilliant. I think for us, we work on I can't remember who said this quote, but it was, seek to understand before being understood. And naturally, if you're going to put these things out there for your own benefit and for the sake of having it out there, it's purely egotistical. What you have to be looking at is, are you solving a problem? Is it something that your client base can empathize with? And therefore, are you somebody that they can go to because of the content you're putting out is relevant for them? Everything Adam said was absolutely spot on.
And I think going straight back into that, Adam, I think it's being mindful of the resource as well, because as you say, you can't start small. Don't go try and deliver so much, which is just impossible, because you actually end up missing it all, and then you end up dropping it because it's not working for how you want it to deliver. So it is, I think, starting small, and then, as you say, once you understand how it all works, building it out, as you say. Brilliant. And then, so moving this on, it's like bringing James a bit here. Is once you've actually, no, it's still going back to Adam. So this whole you've got the content strategy, you've got the whole thing in place, and then it's like, actually, when do you start to think about the channels you're going to use to consider, and how do you make sure that the content you have is going to reach that audience, but also be valuable to that audience? And sort of what are the considerations you should look at when you're going through that content strategy into the development of that side of things? It's like, what channels do you consider and should you consider? Because it's all about optimizing the number of channels.
Yeah, I mean, given what we do, what Inflow does, which is helping agencies, marketers put out more content, but specifically written content, I'll focus most of my answer on kind of the written and long form piece. In terms of obviously distributing that to different channels, I know for a fact James has a million comments on that, and I can think of a load of tools. So if anyone wants a suggestion for other tools and things to look at, can think of quite a few that do that really well. But in terms of building the content, building the right content, how do you start before even getting into the channel? I've got quite a few things to help you guys with. So let's go back to the previous point of, you've got your topics in place. So let's say 3 topics, i.e. high level, your strategy in place. You're happy with that, at least for the next quarter or the next half year. As you say, it's then about delivery and execution. And that is then again another daunting task. How do we deliver? How do we execute? How do we do this week in, week out? How do we mobilize the resource of the agency for the agency or for the client? Think about an internal process, basically. But giving you a bit more help than that is for each post, think about the following different elements for any content piece. And as I say, I'm going to focus more on written content. So for an article, you need to obviously think, what is the right title, ideally targeting a keyword, a powerful introduction. If you're trying to attract an online audience, you need to really think about, what are the key FAQs across search engines, and answering those questions. Answer it from an online search perspective, but also answer it from the questions you're getting in the buying process as well, and match the two. I think that's really important. And then when it comes to writing any, as I say, written content is the focus of my answer. Then there's a whole load of SEO boxes to tick, right? So I can think of 10, 11 top of my head here. So things like the length of the post would be an obvious one. The keyword you're targeting, not overly peppering an article with a keyword. Thinking about active voice, passive voice from a search engine perspective. All of these things are important, but I don't want to go too much detail in that. Back to delivery, I do think tools will really help with delivering on those topics. There's lots of different tools for different parts of the process. There's even, I don't know how much everyone knows on this call, but in terms of this point, it's like GPT technology that's going on in San Francisco and being developed there by a company called OpenAI. Basically, what GPT stands for is generative pre-trained transformer, a nice easy thing to say. And the guys there, you know, a load of scientists there are working on this and been working on it for years and years and years and years and years. What it basically means is you can feed a system a word and it will spit out a few sentences. Now you can guess with that is obviously then there's a lot of QAing involved. But what we're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years is that getting better and better and better. So it goes back to the first comment I made around, you know, the move from Web 0.0 to Web 3.0. 3.0, just to be clear, is a more data-driven internet, meaning the searches are different for whatever we search for, even though we're searching for the same thing. Meaning the need to scale content is more important. How do you scale it without tools and automation is tricky, without increasing the number of people in an agency, for example. So that's where tools come in. But just key advice there, just to simplify a bit more. You've got your topics, then it's about delivery. Think about from at least a written article, the following: a good title, obviously, keyword, powerful intro, Google FAQs, as well as other search engines, and then best practices of SEO as well. Yeah, so some things there.
Excellent. James, anything to add from that side of things from Force 24 in terms of how you look at your content as well?
Yeah, it's I suppose, you know, from a content creation perspective, you know, creating the content is one skill and one part. It's then the distribution piece where Force 24 start to facilitate and help brands get that out. You know, the big challenge that we see is that, for example, from an email perspective, people create an email, a wonderful piece of content, they send it out once, and then, well, who gets it again? You know, did they open it? Did they click it? And if you don't have the actual metrics to be able to understand, you know, did they download it or did they get to a certain point within the article? In actual fact, you've kind of burnt through the opportunity of being able to redistribute or give it a broader reach. And the big challenge that we often see is that just because we created a piece of content, for example, in January, does not mean that that's the most valuable time for people to consume it. And one of the big things that we've started to push out is we work on a rule of 6. You know, traditionally through cold acquisition, people will engage with 1 in 6 emails, which means if we were to just constantly send out the same email, it gets boring very, very quickly. But if we break down the single topic and the single article into 6 components, which could then be introduction, social proof, gain, fear of missing out, logic, urgency. Naturally, what I've got there is multiple touch points which logically people can engage with. They can understand why we've gone to this point. And what I'm then trying to track is not the open or the click, but in actual fact, I want to deliver people through to a dedicated landing page where they can digest that full content piece. Or even if it's gated, much better for me if I'm capturing data. But inevitably then I can take that, have they got through to that thank you page? Have they downloaded it? As such, if they have, they've done everything we want. You know, does that generate leads for us? Do we follow that up in a certain way? However, if people haven't taken that action, is it logical that I give them another bite of the cherry? Especially in the modern world now, you know, I'm not at home today, but traditionally if I am, you know, I may get an email come through that's perfect. You know, it's a hook for me and I want to engage with it. I want to go and read that piece of content. However, within a minute, you know, the wife's called me, the kids are crying, I'm dragged into another room, I come back and I'm in a meeting. And all of a sudden that content, which I did want to engage with, I haven't had the opportunity. So that shouldn't be the only bite of the cherry that I'm presented with. But if I come back into the sort of distribution sense of, well, you know, as well, you know, we need to consider that email as a channel is bait. You know, that entire beautifully crafted piece of content shouldn't exist in that email. There should be a few extracts and some hooks which we're trying to generate interest from to deliver people to a page where they can consume that properly, and in a similar fashion through social media, etc. You know, it should be the same thing. You know, it's an idea of how can I give you a flavour of what we're talking about before generating through, and then Adam, I think, covered off pretty eloquently all the stuff around, you know, from a paid and a search and sort of an SEO perspective, how that works. But inevitably, you've got that organic and paid component, which need to work harmoniously as well.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit there. I think it's my internet, as always. You've sort of answered sort of quite a few of the questions, and just if anyone's got questions, do please add them into the chat. But I think it's that sort of the deployment side of things is really key. Email is a big part of it because it allows you to hit a broader reach, but also you can clearly define and segment through that. And James, in your perspective, how do you start to go about tailoring your content to your target audience and using your platform to help do that?
That's a good question. Naturally, from that perspective, you're driven by the data that you have or by what you're capturing. So in the immediacy, you may just have things like job titles, industries, size of business, which naturally you should be pulling out the extracts and including, where possible, dynamic content to be able to be relevant. If we're talking to somebody in the construction world, they definitely don't want to be hearing our view on retail. But it doesn't mean that they can't technically, within Force 24, receive the same email. It's just that we'd have dynamic components which only show to the industries and the demographics which we select. Though the other side of this, which Adam touched on as well, is we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. If our data and knowledge on the people that we're trying to communicate with isn't fantastic, there's nothing against us being able to put a campaign out and actually ask a few questions. What would you like to hear from us? What are your current challenges? What sort of content would you be interested in hearing, etc., etc. But if you can ask those questions and people come back to you, not everybody will, but those that do shows that they have a requirement at least, and naturally you can start to prioritize those. You can follow up on those questions. You can start to create content, and then dependent upon how we choose to distribute it, again, it's utilizing the data that's at our fingertips to make sure that the imagery, the tonality, the content is relevant. And that can be we've currently been doing a bit of a talk about sort of 3D demographics, where you may have, or we've got construction, retail, and recruitment being three industries that we may choose to be speaking to. But within those, we also have things like, are they existing customers, lapsed customers, never shopped with us before? Are they based in London, Leeds, Birmingham? Are they, 10 staff, 300 staff, etc.? Do they currently use certain products or not? And naturally, all of a sudden, now you've got within those segmentations or those industries, you've got multiple levels of content that you can also include when you start to communicate. So I suppose what I'm trying to get to here is when we put out that wonderfully scripted piece of content, there may be multiple extracts that we choose only to demonstrate and show to the certain verticals, the certain job titles, etc., to reflect their pain points and interests. But within Force 24, the idea of that is that we provide the ability to distribute dynamic content, to set multiple. So instead of, best way to describe this, rather than building 15 emails to target those multiple different variants, you would technically build one email with dynamic components, which only distribute to the people who sit within segmentations. So, rather than building multiple emails, technically I send one email to 100 people and they all receive something slightly different because of who they are.
Brilliant. Adam, do you have anything to add into that as well?
Yeah, what I was just thinking about is, it's hard to have a conversation about content strategy, how to set that up, execution, content types, messaging, without thinking about the overall landscape and context of your sales process. I think that's the only missing thing I would add, is everything you're strategizing on and delivering on, and for who, which is really what those three things cover, everything we said so far, has to be in a backdrop and context of what is your funnel. Now, I think Force 24 is awesome for allowing you to execute on a funnel via really slick landing pages and the creation of landing pages. And then I know they have, really good, helpful things around, thinking about the right CTA and messaging to really push forward into that funnel. But every funnel is ultimately going to be slightly different, because it goes back to what you offer and who you offer it to. And so don't go my advice kind of would be, it goes back to the thinking of 3 topics and not 17 topics, and starting with 1 topic and building up to 3. we've made so many mistakes here in the garden shed around trying to do one ahead of the other. Just to be clear, I'm not in a garden shed. I'm in a co-work space in South London. It's actually very nice. But you've got to do things in town. You've got to do things in parallel. As in, you've got to do the topics, start with small. You've got to think about all the things that James has said around messaging and other channels, start small. But then also at the same time, you've got to be thinking about your funnel. Then CRMs, you can get access to free CRMs until the point you have an arcade, whatever it is, 45 stages of your funnel. You don't start with 45 stages. If you do those sort of elements in sync, I think that's really good. So yeah, I definitely add only that. Yeah.
Completely agree on that. And starting out sort of, and it goes into the sort of next point of this, which is around sort of managing your that funnel is so important, understanding where people are and the data, providing where people are and insight into where people are on that journey. And a lot of our role as an agency in the sort of marketing your business is actually, it's the content is people start with the content around creating awareness, understanding who we are, what we do and what we can offer. And by bringing in the value hooks, that's going to start driving that sort of opportunity through. But then once they've met the client, they then fall down by failing to work out how to nurture the client down that funnel further. And actually, because the aim is to start getting the process to build the opportunity to have those conversations, but then we fail after that. And it's like, so James, that question for you is really around how to develop that content to nurture people down the funnel. Once you've identified and potentially spoken with that sort of client, you've got to get into their buying process. It might be a year, 18 months down the line before they're ready to buy, but it's how do you keep ensuring that you are developing that relevant content that's engaging with them. James, so a question for you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, as a brand, if people are engaging with you, it's naturally what you do and how do you start to tell the relevant story. What we initially will look at here if I think just a broad concept would be looking at, as an individual within Force 24, you exist. We can take the data from CRM, we can take the web browse activity, and we append that against a single customer view. So what I'm starting to understand there is, based on your web activity and behavioral activity, what interests you right now. And through that, what I can start to do is then look at, based upon high value pages or specific products that we offer if people browse them, it's logical, if you've shown an interest in that I would actually want to continue the conversation about that product. So if I think in an agency world, this might be PPC. So you've been on one of our high value pages about PPC. Let me tell you a little bit more about how we do it. What are our methodologies? Some of our success stories. I may even look at introducing you to some of the team, because actually, if I've got people there that are, for example, ex-Google, or have worked 15 years in this service, or have experience in your sector, they're stories that add value and build trust in what we do. But what I'd like to do is build that out as a sequence so that you have those touch points over a period of time, that I can help nurture you and help generate engagement. I can activate a lead score, which at a point may push you into a sales consultant to pick up that phone. But the idea is we shouldn't have to be waiting a couple of weeks before the next newsletter or whatever we send out goes out, with the hope that that also can nurture somebody. We also do a few other things based around things like predisposition codes and CRM and common objections. But naturally, what we should be looking at is how do we connect the online and offline experience. If conversations have been had with the sales team and are being recorded in CRM, there's valuable information there. We just need to understand how do we put that into a format and data structure which something like Force 24 can consume and then remarket out to. As an example of this, what we may say is that I've had a conversation with somebody and they said, "This is brilliant, James, but actually it's probably 6 months before we start to look at this project, and you guys aren't the cheapest people on the market." What I can do in Force 24 is build a journey out which starts to take those touch points into consideration. So it's 6 months and it's about cost. So I may exclude that individual from our marketing comms for 5 months because I don't want to pester them while they're no longer in market. But for the last 4 weeks, I'm going to send them on a journey which talks very much about the value proposition we have. No, we're not the cheapest in the market, but this is what we do that nobody else does. this is how we support our clients, and here's some testimonials. This is the quality of the team that you'll be working with and how we support our clients. And what that means is when I then escalate that back into the sales team as a regenerated lead, rather than the conversation being, yes, you are still too expensive, hopefully some of those objections have been dealt with and we're in a much warmer conversation. But I've kind of waffled a little bit here, but I think the point what I'm trying to get to is you need to be able to use the data touch points to be able to tell a story that people want to hear in that moment in time. And especially through email, it's traditionally been a broadcast channel where we almost hold people at hostage, whereas I've thought of this, therefore you will listen. I mean, the story goes out. Whereas the modern world now, because people are savvier than ever before and the channels are more saturated than they ever have been, we need to be able to tell the stories that people want to hear in that moment in time. And that can only be directed by the data and by the activity that we're tracking.
And so I've got a couple of questions coming to the chat, which I'm going to bring in now. Sort of, Adam, just one for you. So common mistakes agencies are making at the moment that you're seeing in their sort of content strategy and deployment. Now, there's anything that's standing out, and what should agencies avoid doing? So it's moving into a bit of a top tips thing, but just bringing it in now because there's a couple of questions about it coming in.
Probably disconnect between what they do and what they're writing about would be the simplest answer. But then I could go into a lot. That would be the biggest one. Sounds so obvious again. I sound like a bit of an idiot saying that, but that is the biggest one. So what do you do? What are you promoting? What do you actually offer right now? What are you spending your time developing as a service, and matching that with content topics? We, as part of our kind of customer success function, Inflow, we make sure every month that we've just checked that and that what has changed in terms of offering from the last month. Are you happy with your topics this month as a result, given the bandwidth and holidays and the rest of it?
And I suppose bringing into that sort of that disconnect is the cultural disconnect. A lot of agencies have they talk about their culture in one way, and then the way they write is sort of like robots. And actually, how do you address that in your comms? How do you make sure that you're aligning your culture into your written format?
Don't rely on the laboratory in San Francisco. No, so you've got to have I think it goes back to guidelines, having a kind of set guidelines of what your tone is really for that one, and having a checklist when you're writing the piece of content that you're ticking off, a bit like lead scoring. And I know James would have some opinions on how to come up with a checklist for a lead score. I think it's the same thing when you're writing a written post. There's a lot to consider in any post you put out, obviously. So the tone stuff, that's decided, obviously by the agency. But when it comes to the rest of the checklist, more SEO focused things, that's obviously another checklist. So I think have a guidelines, stick to those guidelines, and then follow an internal process until it's published.
Yeah. And just in terms of another one, GDPR, cookies, data rule, changes in data rules. James, for you, in terms of the impact cookies and the demise of cookies is going to have, what sort of impact will this have on email marketing?
At the minute, we're not seeing too much impact, but it obviously will. The challenges that we're having is that we don't know what we don't know at this stage. Through the first party cookies, so most of the cookies that are being impacted at the minute are third party cookies. So first party cookies still in play, and we're doing quite well there. I genuinely believe that what is going to happen with all of this anonymity that people are almost crying out for is that as soon as all of the content and the marketing that starts hitting them becomes massively irrelevant to who they are, there will be an opt-in immediately for people to want to be able to have this, because the minute we are very fortunate in the sense that everything coming through to us should be as relevant as possible if people are doing the jobs properly as marketeers. If not, we'll just be having to work with the data that we do have, and inevitably we'll just have to become savvier and craftier in what we put out to try and marry those two worlds together. But we are working and evolving with this as fast as we can, but it's still a bit of an unknown, really.
Brilliant, thank you. Adam, do you have anything to add around that, or is it just no? Cool.
That's very good.
And then in terms, I suppose, it's one of the things that sort of there's so much content out there. It's how do you go about ensuring that yours is actually going to be seen and read, but also actually within that, what works, sort of what formats work best as well? Because we talked about the written, we've talked about long form, we talked about sort of email side of things, but how do you make sure that actually you're getting your content out there and distributed in the best possible way?
Do you want me to say that on?
Oh, James, got this. Yeah.
I mean, inevitably, for my primary channel is email, and if I want that to go out, inevitably it has to be the email's a hook. You know, there is a bait, and if we look at, I think Microsoft's holy grail of email is, I think it's 10 words and a button. You know, which is incredibly difficult to achieve. But through email, the idea again is that email is bait. This is purely a hook. So we have to have a squint, something provocative, something that makes it personalized and relevant to each individual we send it to. You know, that empathy piece, which we touched on. But, you know, don't be afraid to push it further and longer and harder than you thought you had to or could do, because you have created this wonderfully compelling piece of content. Then it is valuable. We just have to be able to keep it out in the marketplace long enough for everybody to have an opportunity to engage with it. You know, that's obviously providing that we have created something good and that is valuable. But from a social media perspective as well, it's about the targeting, it's about the personalization, it's about it being relevant. And the idea, the question which everybody has to ask before they put stuff out is, would I engage with that? You know, and as marketeers, we really often overlook the fact that this is far more important to you than it is to anybody you're sending it to. So as such, you have to put yourself in their shoes and think, is this something I'd engage with? Because if it's not, then the chances are that they won't either. And if you're just sending it out for the sake of sending it out, believe me, that will come through in the tone of what you've written and the context in which it's been sent. So, you know, really, again, personalization is key, but put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, only thing to add, you know, make it topical, make it exciting, make it engaging. You know, if there's a documentary we're looking at, whatever it is, or a TV show, talk about that. You know, that's fun, that's exciting. It's not just about the service. And that can be done really nicely on socials through cool memes, etc. That's fun. It's also really fun coming up with the memes, I find. And from a written content kind of SEO perspective, back to that very quickly, the answer to this bit would be targeting the right keyword is obviously really important, including that keyword within an article you're writing, relevant to your target audience. In that, you need to consider monthly search volume. Studio Hawk, I know, is speaking later, I think this evening. We'll have a million things to say about monthly search volumes, but keyword difficulty, and i.e., is this a really competitive keyword? That is really, it is important. So those two things are important as well. And then once you start to rank from a written content perspective for a keyword, targeting related keywords within the galaxy of that topic, if you like. So topic, highest level, and then targeting a keyword, seeing how you're doing for that, and then start to target other related keywords. So that will really help you in terms of it being found.
Brilliant. There's some questions flying in now. So I'm going to actually open the floor up first, and then we'll have a final question at the end. But Jeremy, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question around sort of creative and creativity in Web 3.0?
Yeah, I was just asking a question really interesting what you're saying earlier about Web 3.0, and clearly it's more markets of one and more diversity. Clearly the agencies aren't huge these days, though there's not a massive workforce, there's no Slack. How do you maintain creative quality impact and the increasing need to create more and more content, which is more relevant and more engaging, and avoid a sense of just churning content out to try to keep up?
Yeah, so great question. So Web 3.0, obviously data-driven web. My experience, even though we're searching the same thing, is different to yours. Therefore, you need to write more content. How do you maintain quality without scaling a labor force or your workforce? Sorry, it is automation and tools and using the right tools. And this is not me plugging tools, but I do think Inflow would help with that, having been doing this for a few years. So Inflow does help you produce more content and captures, you know, obviously who your target audience are, understands that, builds a content profile to allow you to deliver on that. But there's so many other tools that help with that. You know, you could even look at something like Jarvis. So going back to the scientists in San Francisco, it is slightly relevant again here. is they work, as I say, working on this GPT model, which is a machine learning or basically a neural model. You give it an input, it will give you an output. So a small input, I don't know, bookkeeping, will give you a whole sentence around the pros and cons of bookkeeping. Now, so that would then obviously help speed up and scale content production. You do need to start to try and work out what tools really complement your existing process is the answer, I believe.
What about the, I understand, what about the human touch and the creativity to derive a true emotional engagement? I mean, there's the machine part of it. What about the human part of it to really try and cut through and surprise and not be too formulaic, I suppose, in the way you go about generating content? Where does that come in? Where does the human bit interact with the machine learning?
You've got to work out how tools help you out with the bits that can be automated and focus, if you like, the humans on the bits that can't be totally created. That's the honest answer.
Okay.
So think about things like this. If you're trying to produce loads of written content, let's go back to the written post example. You're trying to put out way more content than you were before. You need to think of your internal process as kind of the following. You've got, as I say, the topics, but then you've got to deliver on the topics. Take a brief. Let's say each post is boils down to having a brief. Okay. So title, intro, questions to answer, points to include, closing statement. Okay. So which ones can you do via tool? Which ones can tools help you with? I can think that's the kind of the approach I would take, and then say, right, certain questions to the answers that we have to answer, i.e. the Google FAQs, I know I need to add my creative flair because there's not going to be, no tool's going to give me that bit.
Right.
Okay. If you
Okay.
don't have a process, it's impossible, basically. So think about the current process you've got. Think about the structure for writing any piece of content. Again, you'll have a checklist and the guidelines. You work out the bits that are more admin based or more laborious. That's where tools can help you, and leave a section for where only you can add like kind of your agency's brilliance and statement. That's how I do it. But it has to, that would be my answer.
Yeah, good answer. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jeremy. Ryan, do you want to just ask your question around the marketing automation and trying to write content in many different ways? Where are you, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool.
So yeah, it was just kind of a question for both of you really, and around kind of marketing automation and writing content. So obviously marketing automation, I've done a little bit of setup before in previous roles, but it's a massive mammoth job of trying to find trying to find the right content and creating the right content. And it's, having that vast quantity of different types of content for different scenarios, so you're leading people down different routes. How would you kind of suggest managing that and kind of also make sure that content is quality to the people that want to actually read it at the end of the day?
I mean, from my perspective, I think that you are right. There is a whole world of potential in the world, in automation. And as a salesman, I inevitably try and sell the dream, and we start talking about, you could be doing X, Y, Z, and this is available to you. But if you're going to be starting, what you need to look at is, what are you doing today? And how do you then take that to the next step? Where's the low hanging fruit? Because, for example, if your challenge in the sales funnel isn't in acquisition, it's in nurturing, or it's somewhere, re-engaging lost leads, then that should be your first point of where you start to put, your automation to work. So it's really about understanding where the opportunities are within your sales funnel, or where the low hanging fruit is to help nurture people, as to where you would start. And then once you have solid foundations, it's then when you've got those processes running in the background that you can then start to build on logically and start to enhance that.
I see. Okay, so basically starting small and building up off the back of that.
Yeah, I think I remember being sat in one meeting, and we spoke to a guy, and he just had his head in his hands. He's like, "This is going to take years for us to implement, to get to X, Y, Z. We'll have to do X, this, that, and the other." And it's like, yeah, but tomorrow you can be doing this, and then the day after, and gradually you build it, stage by stage, as you will do a house. Just don't stretch yourself too far.
So when you get to a certain level, how do you manage that vast quantity of content to update it? Obviously, content becomes old quite quickly as well. So I guess you've just got to have, people, you've got to have the manpower there to update the content on a regular basis, I assume.
Depends what you're talking about. So if we were looking at, from an outbound content creation piece, there would obviously be a time scale on that. So we may run a campaign for a month or 2 months or 3 months if we had multiple topics we wanted to speak about. Naturally, that would come to an end with regard to a journey. Whereas if we were looking at browse abandonment strategies, naturally there would be a trigger from the website, be it a topic, let's say again the PPC example. If you've come onto our page about PPC, are those individuals still in the business? If so, you can still use that. Are those case studies still relevant? If so, you can still use that. Is your methodology with regards to PPC still the same? If so, that's still relevant. So obviously there's your pressing matter of refreshing content comes into that 3-month cycle from what we'd call a master series. Whereas the evergreen piece and the browse abandonment stuff, that can almost run as long as you want it to. So again, here it's about I suppose it's the content and where it is on the site will dictate its lifespan as well, if that helps.
To help with thinking, I think it was a brilliant answer again. Rather than thinking I need marketing automation tools, I would reframe the question to what, as James said, what are the actual challenges of your sales process, and then relate it to the next question is then prioritize those challenges. And you can't obviously solve them all at the same time. So that would be the way to approach that. And if I ask you now, Ryan, what is the biggest challenge of your sales process? I'm sure you'll be able to think of a few things, and then going from there at that point. I think that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, no, brilliant. That's
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, guys. Jill, I want to bring you in as well. You've got us sort of talking about the sales and marketing alignment. I think it'd be really a useful question you talked about in your chat, Jill.
Yeah. Okay, I'm here. I'm having sat on both seats of being in marketing and also in sales, and in my career so far. I'm always curious about, I think the content creation is obviously a brilliant way of driving those inbound leads, but at which point do you, without putting potential clients off and thinking they're being hounded by a sales team, when do you say to the salespeople, all right, okay, go and chase them now because they've engaged with this, then that, with that, and so you don't want to think, oh God, I just clicked on one thing on your website and now I'm getting hounded by salespeople. So that's always a tricky thing to manage. I mean, is it when they've engaged 5 times or twice, or is there a rule of thumb on that?
So that is a really good question, and I speak with a lot of brands who are like, they've opened my email, so we ring it, and as soon as that happens, I would stop opening your emails very, very quickly. So we work on a lead scoring methodology. So the idea would be, as an example, you might get 1 point for opening an email, 2 points coming through to the website, and 5 points for a high value URL, or in this instance might be, having read or got to the thank you page or downloaded that piece of content. We then look at, and this tipping point ranges or wildly differentiates between businesses and industries, but for us at Force 24, our tipping point is 40. If you got to a score of 40, then that would then escalate that lead into the sales team as an MQL, and we'd be saying pick up the phone and speak to Dave or whoever else it is.
And is that 40 mean they've engaged 40 times, or is different content have a higher score on it?
So yeah, depending on the sort of quality, not just with the content, but we'd also be taking the browse activity across the whole website. So if they've just opened an email, we'd give them a point. If they'd have come through to the website, I'd give you 2 points. If you, let's say this piece of content we deem as high value, or if it's downloadable, I might give you between 5 and 10 points. So in actual fact, just engaging with one piece of content isn't value enough for it to be constituted as a lead in our instance. But then that score should depreciate as well, because for example, if you read one of our pieces of content in January and then another in September, those combined can't then dictate that you're a hot lead. So that operates as a temperature of engagement. But again, some of our clients will have lead scores where it's 100 where it then constitutes it's a lead for the sales team. We have some guys where it's 15. But for, as I say, for us at Force 24, it's 40 where we would say, guys, now it's a lead. But if the guys are quiet, we'll reduce that score and generate some other leads. If they're busy, we'll put that lead score higher so that they're only dealing with more qualified opportunities.
That's really interesting, and especially the bit about, and quite rightly, first time they open an email, they get a call, you just think, oh God, you don't unsubscribe from everything because you just don't want to be hassled like that. But at the same time, you do, as a salesperson, want to be able to speak at the right time and engage in the right way as well, not just
I completely agree, and I think I'm going to step in as well, because actually when there's lots of other
it's gone
out there, so webinars and download something, these are all triggers that add to and point scoring. And I think that's a really sort of key time to think, right, oh, I've got an unstable internet connection, so if I freeze, I'm sorry. But it's a really key time to sort of think about, actually, when do sales come involved? If they engage with you on a webinar, then actually that's quite an important time. If they're downloading things, again, that's add lots more points into that lead scoring system. From an agency perspective, it's a great opportunity because they've obviously got something to engage with you about. But rather than going in and saying, let's have a chat and phoning them up, you can drop them an email and saying, did you find it interesting? Was there anything you missed, or was there anything you'd like to know more about? So you can frame it in lots of different ways, but it's not going direct sales approach. It's being a bit more engaging and nurturing that process all the way through. Or
even a more content-based engagement yourself. So I see that you came to our business development club, for example. If you're interested in the next one, it's coming up in a month, or I don't know, some sort of conversation saying, oh, give me a shout if you want to find out any more, but here's something else you might be interested in because it was related to what you've engaged with on our website, if you're doing a one-to-one thing.
Brilliant. I think I've got one more question from the floor. So Sylvia, I'd love to invite you in to ask your question, if that's okay. If you unmute yourself. Thank you. Sylvia, lovely comments. Thank you. Sylvia, please just go ahead and speak to the guys.
Yes. So yes, I said, yeah, thank you for your insights. And yeah, my question is related, like, how do you know when to post the content, right? Because that is part of the success of the content strategy, like, because it depends on the touch points and it depends on, also the time, that you are publishing it. So how do you select that? Which tools, or if you have like a clear process to do that?
Do you want to say that one, Adam? Or
yeah, I think from a search engine perspective, doesn't make a huge difference at all in terms of targeting a keyword and then starting to rank for a keyword over time. It doesn't matter. Where it matters is obviously socials is going to play more of an impact. I don't have loads to say in terms of the exact timings. It's not I'd want to say some advice that I don't actually fully believe in. If you've got some opinions on, as I say, written content SEO doesn't make much of a difference. Just get into a frequent publishing schedule of 1 a week as a good starting point, I would advise. But in terms of socials, James, do you have any specific insight on that?
Timings is a really difficult thing. There is no single silver bullet of this is when you should post things. Think about, and I'm not always going to bring stuff back to email, but HubSpot release a report every year which tells you, based on their studies, when's the best time to send emails. I think the last time it came out, it was 2 p.m. on a Thursday, which immediately seconds after that report came out, it was the worst time you could possibly send any email. But what you have to be able to look at is who are you trying to target? Who's your demographic? What are the segments within those audiences? Because if I've got C-suite level and above at 50 million turnover businesses, a campaign we did recently, Sunday afternoon is the best time to send those guys an email because they're time poor and they're trying to get ahead of the week. Whereas if I was trying to send that out to a sales manager or a junior member of staff or anything else, it might be completely different. And social media, in a sense as well, people are habitual in their use. But as an example here, so we do have another tool which is about employee advocacy called Soamply. But the idea of that is that if you're sending this out through the brand, You know, and as a brand, we are posting this, and I'm not going to talk about paid in this example, but the brand will probably have the weakest reach in your business. You know, whereas the actual people who have valuable networks and the broadest reach will be the senior individuals and the sales guys, because they're at the core face of everything. So in actual fact, we need to make sure that people like that are not necessarily the timing of such being that, but to Adam's point, but they're prevalent and consistent with their posting and pushing this content out. And as importantly, that they're putting their own spin on it. You know, why should their network be engaging with it? Because they will engage with it because it's them, and their network will speak to them. So the breadth of your reach will also help to dictate the how penetrative that content is, and etc. So timing in a lot of ways can be misconstrued. You know, if you think about LinkedIn as an example, I think it's 24 hours is the lifespan or average lifespan of a piece of content. So it's I think I read somewhere, don't take that as gospel, but the idea being then that actually, should we be more frequent, should we be more persistent, should there be an opportunity where multiple people in the brand are posting this when they feel it's relevant for their network. So that I know I haven't answered your question there, but sometimes it can be more about the breadth of reach as opposed to the actual timing of the first impact.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, I think consistency, the points James made, but also going back to, rather just thinking ideal customer profile, think about ideal user profile. And if you're going after a set profile, which you will be, trying to build in as much detail into that as possible. And going back to another point James made is, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, what does your typical week look like? Obviously not so formal, obviously like that, but in terms of you can really collate really interesting information from 50 users, clients, whatever it is. And that will really help with that, I think.
Brilliant.
Yeah, very useful. Sorry, I just wanted to say, because I'm an SEO, so I always want to know other perspectives like yours. So it's really, really insightful. And for example, for me, I will focus on search volume, but it's because I'm really like, you know, SEO focus, like search volume over time, I mean, for the content. So yeah, thank you so much for your insights.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. I think that is all we have time for. I had one question, but I'll have to ask that another time off record. James, Adam, thank you. That was really enlightening. There are some key takeaways which I'll be circulating next week, so watch the space, and we're posting a video of it later as well. If you want to speak to Inflow or Adam or James, then let me know and I can sort out introductions. As I say, we've got about a minute, so we've got a few other things coming up, events this week. We've got the last 5 p.m. club, which is tomorrow, which is our networking event. That's been hosted by Studio Hawk. If you haven't registered yet, Isabel's going to put the link in the chat, but we can also circulate that later as well. Studio Hawk is a specialist agency dedicated to SEO. Their services are responsive, ethical, authentic, and delivered by a genuinely passionate and diverse team of SEO specialists in London and Melbourne. They were crowned as the best global large SEO agency at the 2021 Global Search Awards. Their clients reach their SEO goals with white hat SEO techniques to make sure their site succeeds and isn't at risk from Google penalties. They have over 400 campaigns to manage, and they've never had a single penalization or manual action due to their work. Next week, we've got the Wednesday, 11 a.m. is the importance of motion and emotion in marketing. And this is all around sort of the human brain absorbing the human brain absorbs visual information 60,000 times faster than plain text. And this is heightened when these visuals are in motion. Using animated idents and explainer videos, logos, and presentations are all ways in which animation can make brands become memorable and thus increase their brand awareness and, most importantly, sales. We have visual expert Christine Mckay, who's joining us, and she's going to explore animated marketing for business. Christine founded Salamander in 2014 and specializes in animation for business and B2B and visual problem solving. Having worked both client and agency side on 3 continents, her knowledge is expert, and it's around building collaborative, frictionless teams and developing that strong company culture. We're also going to be joined by Oliver Wright from Savanta, who's going to present his quarterly updates on consumer and business sentiment, and along with the latest independent agency tracker from Annabelle Dunstan from Question and Retain. So if you want to be in the know, join us then for the latest insights and trends, and information will be coming out later as well. And then finally, we've got the next BD Club, which is on the 8th of December, which is a session with the AAR. We've got Andrew Block and Paul Phillips giving us an update from the AAR and their perspective on the world we live in. Watch out for the comms coming from that. If you want to find out more, give me any questions, or I'll drop any more questions, then please do get in touch, and we'll see you all soon. So thank you very much for joining us. And James, Adam, thank you again for your time.